Stereotypes surrounding API and Asian Americans are prevalent in today's contemporary society. As the first generation API and Asian American immigrants arrived, many seek the way to get into the labor force by any means in order to provide for their families. Due to this process, many of these immigrants push their children into seeking a higher education, one that they could not receive in order to strive in a profession that was not like theirs. Hence, the stereotype and stigma of Asian Americans in certain labor forces appear, making them synonymous with certain professions. As such, Filipino Americans fall under one of these categories as being undermined as a typical nurse. Although the skills required to become a nurse is not one to be taken lightly, as it requires grueling training and school, this stereotype and stigma outweigh the positives and reality of being in that profession.
There are many Asian Pacific Islanders who experience racial profiling. Interview 1 touches base on racial profiling of Filipino immigrants. Lenore Dominguez gives us insight on her perspective of immigration hardships and challenges for labor. According to class material, Lenore demonstrates how the model minority myth has played a role in her upbringing inside the Philippines to America. She demonstrates how the American dream had impacted her life from the Philippines all the way to the United States. The issues of labor has been constructed over the years, and Pacific Islanders have faced many insensible acts due to their race.
My name is Lenore Dominguez. I reside in Orange County, California. I've been here in the U.S. for 30 years, this coming May 15, 2019, and here in Orange County for 22 years.
What country are you from?
I came from the Philippines, and it was on May 15, 1989 when we got here.
What made you want to migrate to the United States?
To be with my family.
Were you accompanied by them?
I came here with my siblings, and it was all in one trip.
What was the hardest part of migrating to the U.S.?
The hardest part of migrating here is adapting to the new life, because in the Philippines, we don't have a lot of modern technology compared here. All you do is like, everything is manual.
Did you face any labor issues while inside the United States?
Yes, because when I got here and I tried to apply for a job, and since I did not have any work experience here, it was hard, and even though I have work back in the Philippines, it doesn't count here.
Do you agree or disagree that the stereotypes of Filipinos being in nursing true?
Can I speak in Tagalog?
Yes.
Totoo. Dahil ang karamihan ng mga pamilyang Pilipino, especially sa Pilipinas, mahihirap ang buhay. So, anong nangyayari, ang mga anak nila pinag-nurse dahil pag nakatapos na sila ng pag-aaral, makapagtrabaho, pinapupunta nila sa ibang bansa. Para kumita ng malaki, and then pag kapag hanap buhay na, magpapadala sila ng pera sa kanilang mga pamilya na kinabubuhay ng pamilya nila para magkaroon ng magandang buhay. Yun ang isang dahilan kaya gusto ng mga magulang na ang mga anak nila ay maging nurse.
It is apparent that in the past few decades, countless of Filipino nurses migrated to the United States for an opportunity for economic gain. But according to Catherine Choi, author of Empire of Care, the cultivation of Filipino nurses was actually an externality of American colonialism. After the signing of the Treaty of Paris, the Philippines was one of many territories granted to the United States. The nation did not wish to be colonized once again after Spanish ruling and retaliated, leading to the Philippines-American War that lasted for nearly 3 years. As the death toll reached over 200,000 casualties, diseases like malaria and cholera began to spread throughout the country. After winning the war, the United States began to Americanize the Philippines by exposing them to their language and adjusting their education systems. Through this transition of a culture, Filipinos began to wish to migrate to the States in hopes to work there someday. American health workers residing in the Philippines requested help from locals to deal with residents that were affected by the malaria and cholera outbreak. At the time, there were no trained individuals to serve as nurses. So American officials began to recruit Filipino women to work. These women were later categorized as volunteer auxiliary contract nurses. By 1903, President William Taft passed the Pensionado Act, which funded a program that permitted certain Filipino students to study in American colleges. This ultimately marked the first wave of Filipino nurses migrating to the United States. The community rapidly expanded through organizations like the Philippine Nurses Association of New York. When World War II occurred, numerous Filipino nurses were trained to serve in the military. Once the war ended, the United States granted the country its independence in 1946, and just 2 years later, the Exchange Visitor Program was introduced, allowing more Filipinos to migrate to America. It was apparent that the growth in Filipino nursing was an essential factor to the success of this program. The nursing community in the Philippines soon grew by 700%, as there were only 7,000 recorded nurses in 1948 and over 57,000 by 1953. The rapid growth encouraged the construction of more nursing schools. Back in 1940, there were only 10 established schools, and now there are over 400 institutions spread throughout the country.
Stereotypes surrounding API and Asian Americans are prevalent in today's contemporary society. As the first generation API and Asian American immigrants arrived, many seek the way to get into the labor force by any means in order to provide for their families. Due to this process, many of these immigrants push their children into seeking a higher education, one that they could not receive in order to strive in a profession that was not like theirs. Hence, the stereotype and stigma of Asian Americans in certain labor forces appear, making them synonymous with certain professions. As such, Filipino Americans fall under one of these categories as being undermined as a typical nurse. Although the skills required to become a nurse is not one to be taken lightly, as it requires grueling training and school, this stereotype and stigma outweigh the positives and reality of being in that profession.